Okay, if you are just joining us, welcome. If you were already here, well, thanks for hanging around. Thank you again to the Evergreen Indiana Library Consortium for providing the Zoom platform for this session, and to Equinox Open Library Initiative for sponsoring the closed captioning for the 2020 Evergreen International Online Conference. All of the sessions and roundtables are being recorded and will be made available following the conclusion of the conference. Please take a moment to acquaint yourself with the webinar tools if you haven't already. You are encouraged to use the chat feature for communication. If you'd like to send a message to everyone in the room, make sure to select all panelists and attendees from the drop-down menu. There's also a Q&A feature available that I will be monitoring to the best of my ability. I'd like to welcome Blake Henderson. Blake is a senior development engineer for the Mobius Consortium in Missouri. He works primarily on writing code to fine-tune the Evergreen software for Missouri libraries, and he's also an active member of the Evergreen community at large. I'm going to give this over to you, Blake, and let you get started.
Okay, can everybody hear me?
Yes, I can.
Oh, good. Okay, great. Well, thank you everyone for coming to Antora, an Evergreen documentation bombshell. My name is Blake. Thank you, Ruth, for that wonderful introduction. These are my slides. Hopefully you can see those. There's a link to them there, slides.mobiusconsortium.org/Blake/Antora. Incidentally, you can take the last part of that URL off, and you can see the other presentations I've given over the years. Also, a little feature with these slides, you can press escape and view them at a bird's eye view if you want to follow along, and feel free. So, starting right in, this presentation is about documentation. Don't let the Antora word confuse you. And we're going to be talking about specifically Evergreen documentation. So the question, I just wanted to generalize a little bit. What is it? What is documentation? Mainly, and I want to stress this the most, mostly documentation is just words and sentences. Nothing fancy, just trying to convey the instructions or the training in a documentation. But also we want formatting, headings, numbered lists, highlighting, and some images and navigation, extra stuff on top. So how do we humans write documentation? Well, we can write a book that requires, editor, publisher, takes a long time to distribute and publish. And by the time the book's out, since we're documenting, in this case, software, the software will probably be different by the time the book's out. So we can publish online where we don't need most of that stuff, but we still need editors. But suddenly you need to know HTML. It's a pretty big hurdle. So now we can do it online with asciidoc. We still need editors. Don't need to know HTML, but we do need to know asciidoc. So that's kind of where we are. The internet is full of websites, and every single website, is basically HTML at the bottom. It all comes out in HTML, and your web browser shows you what the HTML is telling the browser to show the user. But instead of needing to know all that nitty-gritty HTML, we can write it in asciidoc. Just kind of a brief overview of asciidoc. Those of you that were in Lynn's session, Lynn got into some really great details. about asciidoc. I'm not going to get that deep into it, but I still feel I need to run over a couple of basic ideas. So asciidoc does lower the bar of entry as compared to knowing HTML, which will attract new editors because it's easier to learn, and it does reduce the number of keystrokes required. That's another big one. So we can really just focus on what we really need to focus on, which is the words and the sentences. So it's simple. We really just need the words from everybody. And we want to minimize the amount of stuff around the words. We really want people to provide the instructional sentences, and all the formatting ought to be just dead simple and in images. So let's look at some words. These are some words that were taken directly out of an Evergreen documentation page. At the top, we have item status, followed by deleting item statuses, followed by some order instructions, telling the user what they should be doing in order to accomplish the task. Then there's a supplemental image right below there, followed by a note. You will not be able to delete statuses if items currently exist with that status. Pretty straightforward. So those are the words. But of course, that's not pretty. And when you have tons and tons of words and it's all just black and white, it's hard to follow and it's hard to convey the idea of, the instructions. So we can do a little bit of formatting, and we break it up a little bit here. We have a heading, and then we have a subheading. This is all the exact same words, but here I'm breaking it down a little bit. Followed by the numbered list, and it could also be bulleted, followed by a picture file, and that's a note there at the bottom. So asciidoc in action. Here we see how we can tell the asciidoc interpreter what each of these means. So the top heading is a single equal sign, and that's the mustache format. And when you go and look into all the different syntax for asciidoc, you'll find variations that accomplish the same thing. We're focusing on this style, the mustache style, for our headings and Evergreen documentation. So a single equal sign is the tippy top heading, and there's only one main heading per page. That is the title of the page, followed by any number of subheadings and sub-subheadings and sub-sub-subheadings. And you introduce more equal signs the further down the tree you go. So a subheading is just one level below, 2 equal signs, and then 3 equal signs, and so on. And the list, instead of manually typing the number 1 and the number 2 and the number 3, and then you come back later and realize you missed a step between step 1 and step 2, suddenly you find yourself having to change the numbers all the way down, the waterfall 1, then you introduce a new step 2, suddenly you got to change the old 2 to a 3 and the old 3 to a 4 and all the way down. asciidoc simplifies all that for us, and it does the numbering for us, and all we have to do is say period space. That means we want a numbered list, and it will just figure out the numbers for us. Pretty sweet. All we have to do, if we want to introduce a new step in between, we just add another period space and then type out whatever it was. And then the bulleted lists are more simple, and they're just an asterisk. The picture file is syntactically like that: image, colon, colon, then the path to the image. And then if you want to signify a note, you bracket the word note followed by your words. So asciidoc is really trying to minimize the time and the keystrokes it would take to put your formatting in. It really wants to maximize those words. That's what's really important. So asciidoc is great. Here's the results of the previous slide translated into the website, interpreted by the asciidoc engine and then turned into HTML. This is lifted straight off of our current documentation page. Deleting the statuses. Something popped up here. Do we have a question? It's okay. Maybe, do I need to?
I don't see a question there, just comments.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Yeah, that's okay. It was me that commented too, so I apologize.
Oh, okay, no problem. I'll get through the slides and then maybe we'll have a chat at the end. Yeah, so here we are. Here's all the words, and we have a nice the subheading stands out. Deleting item statuses stands out. It's more bold. It's even got a different color. So it's a little nicer than just the words. That way we can easily at a glance distinguish the headings, and then there's our list, 1, 2, 3. And then there's our picture. The picture has an arrow drawn on it, but that was just in the picture. There wasn't anything about asciidoc that drew the arrow or anything. That's just the image itself. And then the note below that, we have the little post-it note with the pen on it, wrapped in a box. And then there's the words that we want people to read. So there you have it, the results of asciidoc. And then you might have noticed that some of those words were italicized. I wanted to touch on that just a little bit here. It's easy. And Lynn's presentation went into this in much more detail, but if you want to italicize something, you just wrap it in underscores like that, and suddenly asciidoc will slant the letters. So one of the biggest issues with documentation in general is the organization. Really, all that stuff with asciidoc, how to write it, getting your words in there and do your formatting, that's all good, but we get lost in this sea of documentation, and that's part of the issue that we're trying to solve here. Where is everything? Where are these documentations? Where are the files? How do I edit those files, and how do I make something new? So let's get into it a little bit here. We, the Evergreen community, we put all of our docs right into the Evergreen source code repository, right in there with all the rest of Evergreen source code. There's a magical special folder dedicated to documentation right in the root of the Evergreen repository, and it's aptly named Docs. Everything else in this folder is not related to docs, to the documentation, so we can just focus in on the folder called Docs. And this is the state of the Docs folder today, or as it was last week when I made this screenshot. There are 46 items in this folder, and it looks like that. Acquisitions folder, admin initial setup, and so on, followed by some loose files, mostly release note files and some root files. Now, I should have called out the media folder I've highlighted here is for the next slide, so you understand that I'm going to double click on the media folder and show you the contents of the media folder. That folder is somewhat special. This is the media folder. There are 1,344 items in this folder, and these are all of the pictures that are referred to throughout all of the documentation in the Evergreen documentation. It's quite a lot of files. Most of them are labeled aptly with the prefix, ACK for acquisitions and so on. And I wanted to point out the navigation a little bit here. So this is an example of the admin folder in the Evergreen repo and the results of that folder as it's shown in the navigation on our current documentation website. And I've highlighted here item status and deleting item statuses to clue you in on those, that documentation I used as an example earlier. So they're down in, number 61 down there. Here's a look at the admin folder. A lot of files here. And all of these files are just for the admin section of our documentation. Acquisitions admin, action triggers process, age hold protection, so on and so forth. So let's take a look at the product of our documentation as it is today, the old current way. Here's our landing page. When you go to evergreenils.org and you click on documentation, this is where you'll end up. We have the 3.2 manuals, 3.1 manuals, development manuals, and then older stuff below that. I'm clicking on the consolidated manual in HTML. And when you click on that, you come to a huge navigation for all of the different pieces of the documentation and their headings and subheadings. This screenshot actually isn't exactly accurate because the page was so long, I used Photoshop and moved some of those things up into this screenshot so you could see some more of the navigation in one screen here. I've also skipped down to pull out some of the lower stuff that I want to talk about, some of the nav down there. So when you're clicking on something in the nav, this would be your step one, where you would come to the top of, in this case, the system administration from the staff client. I want to call your attention to the next button in the top right, the home and previous button on the top left. And I'm going to click on introduction. I'm just going to start at the top, click on introduction. And when you click on introduction, you will come to this little tiny page here where it says chapter 52 introduction. And this part deals with options in the server administration menu found in the staff client. Now we've got some new buttons on the bottom. We still have the home and previous and next at the top, and then now we have up at the bottom of this page. But where did the navigation go? Suddenly we're on a page where we've lost the navigation from before, laying out the outline of where we are in the whole world of documentation. So that was just a kind of a brief overview of what we have now, and I want to enter into the Antora land. What is Antora? You've probably heard about it. I don't know, maybe in some emails on the lists, maybe in IRC, maybe in Launchpad. Antora is open source, and it generates a website from asciidoc. It's pretty, think of it as a wrapper around the whole thing. You still write an asciidoc and everything's the same there, but it comes in and reads all of that stuff and creates a website, a documentation website. And I put the excerpt from Antora's website right here. Right off of Antora, it says the static site generator for tech writers. And so what they call themselves, Antora. And I thought it would be worth showing the old page compared to the new page, the way Antora interprets it. On the left-hand side, I'm sure it's really small on your screen, but here we are. On the left is that same screenshot from a previous slide on that one page where we were looking at the example. And we have the heading, deleting item statuses. And on the right-hand side, you see the same heading, except in Antora's interpretation of that, it's bigger, much bigger, highlighted there in yellow, followed by the numbered list, which also has more spacing in between, a little bit more prominent. Then there's the same image. And the note there is also highlighted in yellow. It's interpreted a little differently. It shades the background in kind of that light blue. It puts the word note in that oval blue. I think it calls attention to the note, I don't know, better in my opinion, maybe. But also, Antora keeps the navigation on the same page. The navigation there in red on the left of the Antora documentation, it has the navigation, and it brings us in bold to the place in the navigation for the page in which we're looking. And also it has across the top what we call breadcrumbs. So it gives you the path to where we are. We're in the Evergreen docs, we're inside of the main heading, system administration from the staff client, and inside of that we're in item status.
Blake, can I ask a question real quickly? I'm kind
Okay.
of taking advantage of my ability
Your
to use the
microphone?
microphone. Yeah. So I am noticing in the old site you have that one page, and then of course you could go to the previous or whatever. In the Antora page, above the deleting item status, there's an image up there. So is this all in one page where it scrolls down, and then are we seeing multiple things there, multiple pages that we wouldn't have seen in the old?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't know that I have a slide that specifically answers that question, but I'll go ahead and mention it here since you can kind of see it. Yes, so Antora does put it all on one page, and it's exactly mirrored from our documentation files. So each file becomes its own page, whereas in the old interpretation of the documentation being converted into a website, a lot of those subheadings were broken into their own page, with the next, home, and previous. So yes, in the Antora style, it will all be one long page, flowing with a table of contents at the top, and so on and so forth. And so on my next slide, I think I get into it a little bit deeper. This is a blow up of the navigation on the left-hand side. Some things to note here is that it's an accordion style where it's collapsible. Each main heading has a little triangular caret annotated to the left, just like you see in many interfaces where things are hiding underneath it. It uses an accordion style, and you can have several subs. So you can see their mark record attributes in this screenshot also has the little ghosted triangle, which indicates there are more sub pages below. The breadcrumbs I've already kind of mentioned, but there it is blown up for you to see a little better. Our root, of course, is the Evergreen docs, and then followed by where we were, main heading, and then sub page. And search, which wasn't shown on the first screenshot, but here it is. It's on the top right, the way we have it designed now. And it is a search as you type. So here's a screenshot of me having typed CIRCU. Of course, I'm trying to type circulation. And it's immediately given me results. And it's kind of a two-column result. On the left hand are the main titles of the page, and on the right hand side are places in that page where the word also appears. So on the left hand side, You might see some listings that don't actually have the word circulation in them, like borrowing items, who, what, for, and how long. That doesn't have the word circulation in it, but there is the word circulation on that page inside, and the heading there was circulation rules. And then, of course, beneath that is also circulating uncatalogued materials, also mentioned on that page, and so on and so forth. So those of us that were in Lynn's talk, there was some talk about indexing, and that's still important. But this search mechanism does automatically index and search the headings. So all of the level 1, level 0, level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4 headings are automatically ingested and searchable. Probably some more testing on exactly what other things can be searched is still in order. And lastly, Antora gives us this great tool for version. What version of the Evergreen docs, of the Evergreen software, and by association, the documentation for that version, are we looking at? So in the bottom left corner is where it's situated now in our example. Right now, we just have the latest. We don't have Antora's documentation for any version prior to this version, which is just working off of master right now. But whenever new versions of Evergreen are cut, the documentation goes with it, and Antora will generate a whole nother site for each version, and you can quickly change versions on any page that you happen to be on in the documentation site. So if you wanted to see what that page looked like in a previous version, you can click down here and change the version as we move into the future with this Antora product. Pretty cool. So with all that said, a lot of questions come up about, are we going to be having to do anything different? Can we just take what we have now and make this site? And the answer is, well, yeah, some stuff is different. There's a little bit of stuff we have to do to make Antora happy. Antora enforces a folder structure, which is why I had all those slides about the state of the affairs of our current folder structure. And in my opinion, it's an improvement. Here's the folder structure. Side by side, we have the old root, which we've seen in a previous slide, and then this is the Antora's root folder. Notice there are way fewer files here. Most of these you can ignore. There is a README, which is not required by Antora. Really, the only thing required by Antora is the site YAML file and the Antora YAML file. The rest of that stuff is meta stuff that we've added for our own sakes. Now, I've got the same screenshot on the left here because there isn't an associated folder in the old way to compare to Antora, but this is the modules folder within the Antora, and I'll go back up and call that out. There's the modules folder there at the top. So by and large, modules folder is really where we're going to be heading. Now you start to see some similarities. We do have a mirror of our modules, quote unquote, acquisitions, admin, initial setup, API, appendix, and so on, as compared to the old way. Antora has this notion of modules, which is kind of a new term when it comes to documentation, I would say. They want things broken into modules. So within an example modules folder, I just picked circulation because I've mentioned it already. On the left-hand side, those are the files within the circulation folder as it is today. And if you go into the module folder called circulation in Antora, you'll see that there's much fewer items here. We have a nav, we have an attributes file, we have assets and pages. you might have guessed that pages is where really all of the documentation is. And you can see the pages are basically a mirror from what we had the old way, with some added files, the attributes file being the main difference there. Okay, I have another one here, which is going back up to this folder. We have an assets folder, which is where it organizes mainly the picture, the images. So I've gone into, and here I've highlighted it in purple on the top here, Antora docs, modules, circulations, assets, and then there's a folder called images within assets. And that is the current set of folders inside of the folder called images. On the left-hand side, we have the media directory, which is the closest thing I could find to compare to. So within every module in Antora, circulation, cataloging, they each have their own assets folder, which contains the images that really only apply to those pages. So you could probably guess that the 1,300 files are significantly reduced when you break it into each folder or into each module. And then here we are with the images for circulation. On the right-hand side, there are 65 total images that are called out in our circulation. And the left-hand side, of course, we still have the 1,344 items all slammed into one folder. So organization, Antora enforces this organization. Some of the work that we've been doing in order to make this possible is organizing all this stuff in Antora's way. So we've already done all of the work to rip out all the pictures and put them into their appropriate modules, knowing which ones go to which, and so on and so forth. We've also changed a lot of the headings and things. Also, I have down here, can be organized per doc. What that means is you can make a subfolder in the assets images folder for each documentation file for even more organization. You could do it, actually, it's worth noting that we could have been doing that the whole time in the previous method. But you could, if 65 items was still too many, and I feel like it is, I think that each, in my opinion, each piece of documentation needs its own folders for their images. So that way, you could have a folder that mirrors the exact same title of the document that contains just the images for that document. Anyway, a little word about images. Antora knows. We have this little thing that I mentioned a minute ago called attributes.asciidoc. That's a special file that is for Antora. We've already pre-created all these files, and they all look exactly the same. They look exactly like that. The contents of those files look like that: colon, attachments, directory, colon, and then some syntax for Antora to understand. So in this case, images directory is located in assets images. We've uniformed them all, so they all say assets images is where we're storing all of our images. That way, we don't have to have such a long call out reference to those images. And here we are. How do you refer to an image? Well, you say, like I've mentioned, image : media / holds title options ping. And if you want to add some alt text, which is the mouse over text, also for screen readers, accessibility, you add a square bracketed piece of language there, and then the whole thing altogether is image : media. Notice there isn't anything in front of media. Antora understands that if you say image : it knows based on that attributes, we'll go back and refer to the attributes. Based on this line, images are located in asset images. So it's already starting at the folder images. And beneath that, we have a folder called media, and that's only there because that's the way it was before. Some of the work we might consider is to eliminate the media folder because it's kind of redundant. So there, anyway, we are at the completed image tag to show the picture on our documentation, image : media / name of the file, followed by the square brackets for screen readers and the tooltip on some browsers. Okay. Antora also gives us more control over the navigation specifically. We, before, right now, we don't have a way to make that navigation as we see fit. It's automatically generated by our creation script based on our heading tags. So now we actually have to make our own navigation in Antora. So the whole entire navigation on the left-hand side is handmade, which is good and bad. It's more work, but it is good that we can control it. And here's an example of the root file, the antora.yaml file that I mentioned a minute ago. Looks like this. It has a name, docs, title, Evergreen docs, version, latest. This is where we would title each version. And whenever we cut new versions of Evergreen, this file will need to be updated to mirror whatever version it is that we're on in Evergreen. And then it has this keyword called nav, and this is where you teach Antora where all of the navigation asciidoc files are. And they look just like that. Modules, root, and that's the main nav, and then the installation nav, the admin initial setup nav, and so on and so forth. And the beauty of this is that each module has its own nav, so you don't need to edit a master nav file in order to add your navigation links. You can just edit the nav for the module in which you're editing, and it will be consumed along with all the other ones and compiled to create the one big nav on the site. The circulation folder example navigation file I'd like to show you. This is, of course, in the circulation module folder for Antora. And there's the nav.adoc file. And it starts right off with the navigation. It doesn't have any headings. It doesn't have anything. It's just a bulleted list and a sub-bulleted list, starting with a single bullet in this XREF language. And then circulation is the name of the module, followed by the name of the file introduction. And we're going to call that circulation for the humans. So on the final web page, the navigation will have an entry for circulation, and that will, when clicked, will take us to the page for the introduction. And beneath that, denoted by 2 asterisks, meaning indented below in the accordion, we're also going to introduce in the same module, circulation module, an entry in our navigation for the circulating items web client.asciidoc, and we're going to have it display the name circulating items, just like that, for the humans to see. And when they click it, it'll take them to the page for circulating items web client.asciidoc. So that page, which is changed to HTML and whatnot, and all the way down and so on and so forth. And I wanted to call out this line here. This one deviates from the pattern and has the word admin. So in this example, we're actually putting an item in our navigation that calls out to a different module, in this case admin, and we feather that in to our navigation, and we can control where it goes in the navigation and what order and whatnot. And it calls out to, in this case, admin, patron self-registration, asciidoc. Pretty sweet. And so on the right-hand side, we have the results of those navs. Circulation then is expanded down their circulating items, holds management, booking module, and so on. So that ought to be a concrete example. Hopefully people are following along here. I have to get used to presenting to no feedback. Usually I read the crowd.
I can interrupt you as often as you'd like, but people are following along from what I'm
Okay.
seeing.
Okay, good. Yeah, reading the room is definitely lost. So, okay, so table of contents I wanted to talk about, and Lynn went into it as well. Antora, and really it's just standard asciidoc, interprets this special little language, :TOC:. And that is such a tiny little line, and it has almost no, it's so insignificant on your documentation, but it's very significant on the final product. This is an example from module circulation, pages, circulating items, web client, which we talked about already. And all you have to do is right below the main heading to introduce this line called :TOC, table of contents, : and it makes the table of contents. On the right-hand side, it's probably really scrunched on your screen, but there it is. That is the entire table of contents that was automatically generated for us by Antora, just by the virtue of having that one line. You might wonder how, or why, or where, or all those questions, and it does it based on the headings. The headings are super important. So you have your main heading, that's the single equal sign, and then you have your and in this screen, or in this copy, I've actually got the old heading, the teal days, which I think I left there in order for me to talk about it on this slide. We are preferring the mustache style, which we've mentioned. In this case, it would be 2 equal signs wrapped around the word checkout. And in the table of contents, it starts off with checkout, which is a clickable link. Every one of these are clickable, and when you click them, it jumps you down to that part of the documentation on that page. And these are all the headings and subheadings. So beneath check-in, you'll see that there are indented more table of contents entries for each of the triple equal signs for the subheadings. That's how that works. And I'm getting close to the end of my talk. We'll have a good few minutes to have some questions. I wanted to throw out a great asciidoc editor. Lynn's talk was great. She mentioned many different editors, and then she went on into using, I believe it was Visual Code.
Yeah, she used Visual Code.
Visual Code in conjunction with asciidoctor plugin on the browser. There is another tool that she left out, and that's called asciidoc::FX. asciidoc::FX gives you a file browser on the left-hand pane, which is there squared in red. It also allows you to have multiple files open. That's there squared in red in the middle. And you'll see all of your ASCII document there in the main pane. And on the right-hand pane is the interpreted, roughly interpreted what it would look like on the browser. Of course, it doesn't have any of our Evergreen styles or anything like that, but it gives you the headings and it gives you the tables and the pictures and stuff like that. So a really great tool for editing your documentation. I found it to be very handy. And here are on my slides, which hopefully you've taken note of. You can go and click on these on the slides themselves. There's a link to Antora, there's a link to asciidoc::FX, and then the quick reference that I use all the time when I'm writing asciidoc. Just how do you do bold? How do you do italics? And also refer to Lynn's presentation, which will be on YouTube soon, I'm sure. And then I've also got a clickable link to the Antora Evergreen documentation, which I will click now. And here it is. This is the main landing page. Goes to the introduction. Here on the left, you can click on these links and it will show you the nav for the one you clicked on. You can click each one. There's your table of contents. You can scroll down, see what it looks like. We did introduce the previous and next at the bottom to stay congruent with what everybody's used to with the old docs. So you can click next and just go right to the next piece of documentation in that navigation that you're in. We've also added some fun stuff in the top right. We've got some drop-down menus, documentation interest group, the Evergreen roadmap, Evergreen wiki, tabular release notes. These are all things that are on our WordPress site also, but we've mirrored them here so we don't discombobulate people too much from the main site. So you can see those, and this is all completely editable in our UI. And the search in the top right, I encourage you to use that. So there you have it. Now back to my slides. The end. There's my email address. There's the link to the slides again, for those of you that might have missed it in the first slide, and the Launchpad bug where a lot of this discussion has taken place. So at this point, I would be happy to open it up for questions.
You can put any questions you have in the chat box, or you can use the Q&A feature, and I'll be watching that. I do have a couple questions, Blake. So the breadcrumbs, and I don't know if you can go back there. Actually,
Sure.
I'm going to get into Tiffany's question. Otherwise, I can just ask questions all day. So are all the official docs now Antorized, or is it still a work in progress?
Let's see. The official documentation, and I don't think there has been any commits to the master branch for any documentation since we've Antorized them all. But I understand there's lots forthcoming. So it's still in its own branch. It's not been merged to master. So that's kind of a problem. If you're going to be contributing documentation, there are two places now. There is what we're having the old way, the main way right now, which is in the regular docs folder. And then there's this other branch, the Antora branch, where you would then have to contribute the very same documentation to, at least until we make this the real, the final version. Does that answer the question?
Yes, sort of. I mean, yes, it does. But so the next question is, do we need a core committer to get it into master, or is there something else? And that was going to be my same question. What is the mechanism to actually get that?
Yeah, I love these questions, and I hope that part of my other little micro goal in this presentation was to get people excited about documentation and come to the dig meetings. We've talked about this question about what we need to do next in the dig meetings, and yes, core committer does need to actually do the actual final straw to merge the branch into master. But just seconds before that takes place, we're going to need to prep the branch for that. We'll go ahead and remove the old docs folder and rename the Antora folder to just be the docs folder, and de facto will take over. It will take over the docs folder, so that we will have the Antora stuff in the folder called docs. Right now, if you look at the branch, you'll see the old docs folder and another folder called docs Antora. When it goes to master, we're going to need to melt those two together.
Is there any danger of losing the old documentation for deprecated branches or deprecated versions?
Yeah, I addressed that with some code. And Galen helped. We introduced or ran a rudimentary bash script to loop through all the branches, every branch in Git, looking for non-merged documentation changed files that are changed in the docs folder. And we didn't find any. We didn't find any outstanding branches in the docs folder that were editing files in the docs folder. That's not to say that it's not different today, but we are trying to address that, and that we won't lose any changes to the docs if we do make the merge.
There's a comment from Debbie saying that DIG did approve Antora as the way we want to go forward with docs. So that aspect of it has been addressed.
Right.
Tiffany, did that answer that adequately for you?
Very recently, I'll mention it here, Remington spent some time just last week on this with the new doc server. He introduced some tools, or ported some tools over that would generate the old docs and the new docs in concert for a while, for the foreseeable future, until we resolve this, until we make the Antora organization folder structure the way.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a crutch right now.
So I do have a question about the folder structure.
Sure.
Is it something that DIG still needs to decide on as far as whether or not each of those doc files is going to have its own asset folder? Am I asking that correctly? Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, Remington and I just kind of decided whenever we were trying to make it work with Antora, and we didn't loop back to that. It's a good question. Are you questioning the folder structure?
No, I'm not questioning that. I'm just questioning how the community is going to come to consensus as far as the folder structure goes. Or if it's already there.
It is already there. It's there as I've laid out here in the presentation. That's the way it is. But it definitely can change. Like Antora, as you saw there, the config file could easily be updated to point to a different folder for each module, whatever we want. I was kind of following suit with standard Antora practices.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Anybody else have any other questions? Gonna wait a second in case there's somebody that's furiously typing. Yeah. Jennifer asked, what version of Evergreen is the current Antora doc for?
Master.
Okay.
Yeah, we're basing on master. I just rebased it about 2 weeks ago, so it's relatively fresh. Bill looked like he was going to say something, and then I don't know what happened.
Bill, do you want me to? Do you want to say something? I think you have the power to do that all by yourself. He's probably like waving furiously behind his camera saying, no, I don't.
Okay.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and call it. Thank you, Blake. That actually was I thought it was inspiring. We're gonna meet back here at 3 p.m. Eastern Time, 12 o'clock, for the Evergreen Self-Check Roundtable with Bill Erickson and Taryn McKenna.